Good evening and welcome back to Centerpoint. Thanks for starting your week with us. We begin tonight with the latest in Israel's war with Hamas and the quest to free the 240-some hostages taken captive on October 7th. The U.S. says that Israel and Hamas are closer to a deal to release some hostages in exchange for a limited ceasefire, but no deal is final. Meanwhile, Israel has been revealing more proof that Hamas was using Gaza's biggest hospital as a base of operations. The Israelis released video of hostages in the hospital and also released 2 videos taken by drones or dogs of fortified tunnels beneath that hospital that led to a steel door with a firing hole. We're joined now by Alex Traiman, CEO and Jerusalem Bureau Chief of the Jewish News Syndicate. Alex, welcome back to the show. It's good to see you.
Thank you, Lindsay.
Okay, so over the weekend, there were 30,000 plus people marching outside of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's office demanding that the government do more to release these hostages. We know now from over the weekend, Israel and the U.S. saying they are closer to a deal with Hamas. What is the latest?
Well, first of all, important to note that it's not the Israeli government holding the hostages. It's Hamas holding the hostages. We've heard reports over the last several weeks that there could be a deal which would allow for Hamas to release female hostages and children and maybe some elderly in exchange for a cease in the fighting, a temporary truce or pause in the fighting for several days, which would be time that would enable Hamas to rearm itself, to switch its positions on the ground. It was something that could make things very difficult for the IDF once fighting resumes.
Okay, so let's talk about that a little bit because, as you noted, this is not for all the hostages if a deal is met. As far as we understand yet, it's just for a few. So is there concern for the precedent that this would set with Hamas? Because if they know that they could get a 5-day window to reload every time they release, say, 50 plus hostages or just a few, I mean, we're talking 200 plus left. That's a lot of opportunity for them, as you mentioned, to recalibrate.
Well, first of all, we're not certain if 240 hostages are alive. Just since the raid on the Al-Shifa hospital, we already determined that at least 2 of the reported hostages were found dead in the morgue next to the hospital. And there's a strong likelihood that there may be other bodies that are currently in the process of being identified that may be reported in the coming days. But certainly the whole concept of hostages, taking hostages, was part of the psychological warfare that Hamas was playing from day one. This is the only leverage that they have over the IDF, and they understand how deeply the Israeli society values every single life and how much it would be willing to do in order to get some of those hostages returned. And unfortunately, Israel has set many precedents in which it pays a hefty price to get back its loved ones.
So I mentioned the people that marched over the weekend. You're there on the ground. What is the feeling? Because you hear many Israelis saying we aren't finding out enough information about the conversations that are taking place, yet you have Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu saying these are very sensitive conversations, negotiations. There's a lot of different countries involved in them, and that he's spoken to the families of hostages. So what is the feeling specifically there on the ground?
Well, like you mentioned, there is some significant intelligence about where some of the hostages might be located or what has been discussed. But if any of those details get out into the public, that could then change the calculations. It could make the price for getting some of those hostages back go up. And certainly the IDF and the Israeli government want to pay as low a price as possible in order to get the hostages back. At the same time, if the IDF understands that they can locate some of the hostages, they may be buying time in order to try to do a raid and try to successfully recover some of the hostages without having to do a trade. So there's a lot of considerations here, and obviously a lot of tension on the part of the families that have loved ones in Gaza. It's been more than a month. You can understand why they are trying to rally as much public support as possible, but they have to understand that getting the hostages back is only one of the goals of the war. The primary goal of the war is to make sure that Hamas can never take a single hostage ever again.
Speaking of public opinion, one of the challenges of this war is that Hamas uses a lot of propaganda. And because of that, the IDF has been putting forth a lot of information. Over the weekend, they actually released that they had discovered a 180-foot tunnel under Shifa Hospital. And they also released this surveillance footage showing Hamas fighters bringing hostages into that hospital on October 7th. There's been a lot of question about Israel targeting the hospital, asking that hospital to evacuate since it is such a large hospital. Does this footage prove that Hamas was operating out of that hospital and quell some of that propaganda that Hamas was saying, no, we aren't?
It's been known for years that Hamas has been using the Al Shifa hospital as one of its command centers inside the Gaza Strip. And to be honest, if Israel didn't have to go out of its way to try to demonstrate and lay the groundwork for the raid of the hospital, they probably could have gone into the hospital much sooner. They probably could have captured a lot more of the equipment that was moved out of the hospital in the days in which they understood that the hospital was going to be raided. And possibly they could have even rescued hostages that were believed to have been stored or kept in the hospital in advance of the IDF raid. So Israel needing to lay that groundwork and proving that this hospital, which has been known for years as a Hamas command center, over and over again, probably led to some significant battle difficulties for the IDF.
All right, Alex Traiman in Jerusalem. It's good to see you this evening. Thank you.
Thank you so much.